Hey, loan officers, Brian Stevens here with the National Real Estate Post, and I know that you're trying to find a reason to have a conversation with a real estate agent, but what is the icebreaker? Why do you go to them? My rates are great. Everyone says that. My turn times are wonderful. Everyone says that. You want to have something different. Listing Booster right now is going to give you that icebreaker conversation and actually help you and that real estate agent close more business. I'm telling you right now, the whole thing's been redesigned. Check it out. Just click this banner right over there. Hey guys, Brian Stevens here with NREP. I have no other than Barry Habib. You all know him. He does not need an introduction. The last time I had a conversation with you was a few months back before everything started going crazy by today's standards. And then I asked you, I said, I can't make heads or tails of this because the usual indicators that we look at to prognosticate seem to be untrue based on a lot of the dynamics at play at the time. And you said, oh, no. Here's what's going to happen. And you pulled up some graphs and we went through it. And I've been actually watching for the past few months to see what was going to take place week by week, month by month. It has trended and tracked essentially exactly as we discussed it. Now, at the same time, I've also been watching all the other folks who are professional prognosticators on the news. And I'm like, these guys just don't have it like Barry does. In fact, I had a conversation with my wife. This was funny. I said, oh, they're going to say that inflation's going down. She goes, how do you know that? I'm like, well, I got my inside guy. So now that we've seen the past few months of craziness that I couldn't make sense of, it seems like it might be getting even crazier right now. So what can we expect with inflation, with interest rates? How do we pivot and how do we navigate these waters right now as loan officers?
Well, thank you very much for the kind words. And you almost always figure it out for everybody and explain it to everybody. So thank you for the kind words. But yeah, you're usually the one that does that and figures it out for a lot of your listeners too. But brother, here's the thing: inflation drives mortgage rates, and a lot of people were thinking about, Fed's going to drive mortgage rates. And what we talked about is kind of what's happening, right? Saying that when the Fed hikes rates, if the market perceives it to be fighting inflation, then mortgage rates will respond. And if you take a look at June 15th, the first of the two 75 basis point rate hikes, mortgage rates have come down a lot since then. And because they were perceiving that we'd fight inflation. Now, we just got an inflation report, which showed, still pretty high levels of inflation, but some encouraging signs. We just have to be a little bit careful here not to get too excited over the short term. The good news is that rates, I think, will come down. I think they'll come down towards the end of the year, but we got to get past the next two inflation reports, because the way it works is, we showed this in the graph last time, we'll just talk about it. You take each of the most recent 12 months individual monthly inflation numbers, and then you add them together, and then there's a little rounding and compounding. But right now that's 8.5%. That's come down from 9.1%. So, okay, that's improvement. That's really good, but 8.5 is still high. Now, the way that it works is when we got the most recent number for the month of July, that's what we got. We got a number for July that showed 0 monthly inflation. We'll talk about that in a second, but it replaced 0.5% for July of 2021. So the year over year number comes down about 0.5%. Again, there's some rounding there. There's a little compounding. So that's why it's off by 0.1% because of the rounding component. Still, that's a nice move to get it down that much in 1 month. Now, when we take a look at the next 2 months, the readings for 2021 were relatively low, 0.3 and 0.4 respectively. That means even just a little inflation will push those year over year numbers up. And even if you get a 0, it's not going to push them down that much. Now, why do we get 0 inflation? Because if you ask, folks like you and I and people listening and general public, say, it doesn't feel like 0 inflation to me. I'm still paying more for food and more for a lot of things. This was predominantly 80% of the reduction was due to gasoline prices dropping. And give credit to Habib, who's part of our team at MBS Highway, and he's had this very reliable way to prognosticate what gasoline prices are. And there's a formula, and I'll share it with everybody. And what you do is you take the price of a barrel of oil. And there's two ways to look at it. We'll look at West Texas Intermediate, which is generally for the United States what we go by. So it's WTI or West Texas Intermediate. If you take a look at the price of that and you say, okay, today it's roughly $90 a barrel. Now what you're going to do is you're going to take that and multiply it by 1.5. Why do we do that? Because oil, to convert into gasoline, there's an expense for that. It's about a 50% cost for that. So, these are round numbers that we're looking at here. So now we're looking at 150. Well, in a barrel of oil, there's 42 gallons of gasoline. So then you divide that number by 42. And then what you want to do is you want to add 20% for markup and for taxes. When you put that all together, you're going to find that it's going to, with a little bit of a lag, match what you're seeing at the pump by about a week or so, maybe 2 weeks. So Jake's been forecasting when it was, first of all, he forecasted them to go up to $5 a gallon. And then he said, okay, we're going back to 4. And a lot of people were scratching their head. It was like 4.90. He said, it's going to go to 4. But sure enough, it was like $3.99 was the latest reading. Based upon this formula and lag, maybe it gets down another 10 cents or so. But I think almost all of the juice we got out of this squeezed out. So why is this so important? Because inflation, a lot of the components of inflation have been driven by prices of gasoline and energy. When you see that coming down, that's going to be favorable for inflation. And it may, in this case, it has overridden some of the other costs that are going up. But if we stop seeing a benefit from this, you could see inflation go up. And remember, the $1 million a barrel released from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve has acted favorably towards reducing gasoline prices. And then the old, what's the cure for high gasoline prices is higher gasoline prices, because you probably, Brian, a lot of people you talk to, what are they telling you? Maybe I'm thinking twice about taking that, long trip, or, gas is an expense. So less consumption has helped that too. But now we've got lower gasoline prices. I mean, still pretty high, but a lot less than what it was. So maybe people consume a little bit more. And with October 1st, no more Strategic Petroleum Reserve, right? Release. So does all this mean that we start to see a little bit of a bump up in fuel prices? And does that push inflation up? And does that then push mortgage rates a little higher? I think the next 2 months, we have to be careful. After that, I think things start to get a lot better. The flow of goods from the supply constraints gets better. We will start to see the benefit of the Fed rate hikes. Another one, September 21st, will slow things down. People will save more. Inflation is too many dollars chasing too few goods. So, people borrow less because personal loans, consumer loans, business loans, commercial loans, that takes money out. People save more because they're getting a reasonable rate of return. That takes money out of the system. Goods come in, so inflation should start to come down. Bottom line, mortgage rates should get into the 4s, and I think we do good in mortgage environments where in the 4s.
Yeah, that's good. You said something earlier I'd like clarification on, because I heard this before looking at inflationary numbers, and the highest in 41 years, which takes us back to 1981. Volcker, who was the Fed chief at the time, went nuts with rates, and there was a quote by raising rates. And there was a quote, he said, he goes, I'm going to raise rates. He goes, I need to stay the course. I need to raise and keep them high because people need to know that we mean what we're doing. And it was the impression was enough to pull inflation down. You said the same thing with mortgage interest rates. As we're raising it, like the fact that we're doing that leads to a belief within the mortgage industry, and it's that belief that's going to bring the rates down. Can you clarify that?
Sure. So Volcker was terrific. Was very, had a lot of backbone. It wasn't easy what he did. Think about this. He took the Fed funds rate from 8.5 to 20 in 6 months. So just imagine that. And inflation dropped because of it. It went from 14% to 5%. And because inflation dropped, mortgage rates declined by, get this, 6%. It was 8. It came down to 12. So this is not just one time. It was a similar situation under Greenspan when he raised rates significantly within a year and mortgage rates came down significantly. And now with Jerome Powell, when they finally got serious about it and stopped dicking around with a quarter point, when they finally said, okay, we're serious here, and they did the June 15th and then the July 27th hikes, each of 75 basis points. We have since then seen mortgage rates improve a lot. Why? Because inflation drives mortgage rates. And when inflation comes down, mortgage rates come down. So it's the anticipation that inflation will come down, again, for many reasons, because higher rates at the bank, people will save more instead of spend more. And inflation is simply, again, too many dollars chasing too few goods. You add supply chain, that's more goods, alleviates inflation. People save more. That's less money out there, less inflation, and people borrow less because by the Fed hiking rates, the big loans, the commercial and industrial loans, as well as car loans, credit cards, personal loans, home equity loans, those types of things, it becomes prohibitive because rates go up a lot and it costs a lot more. The economics don't make sense anymore. And people say, well, maybe I won't borrow as much because I know that it's either already more expensive or going to be more expensive. So the market's getting ahead of it and saying, hey, that's why you can't get a 0-point loan, by the way. You can't get a 0-point loan because the smart money out there is saying, well, people make the mistake, they make the mistake and they call it a par rate to the consumer. It's not par, it can't be par, right? What does par mean? Par means that I'm selling this loan at par value, at equal value to an investor. Well, if you're writing a $500,000 loan and selling it for 500, how's the loan officer getting paid? How's the company getting paid? How's the agencies, Wall Street? So it's not par. It's 0 points to the customer, but it's above par when you sell it. So maybe it's 102 or 103 is what you sell. $500,000. Let's just say you're selling it for 510, just for purposes of example. Well, normally that's okay because you're getting extra yield and maybe it takes you 2 years to get the benefit of that yield. Now that's a great thing. If I'm keeping that mortgage on the books for 4 years or 5 years, I love all those above par loans and love those 0-point loans to the customer. Love that. But if it's going to refinance in the very near future, then I've spent 510 for a loan that's worth 500. When it refinances in 6 months or a year, I'm only getting 500. So did I make up that extra money I spent to buy it in the additional premium? And if it's less than 2 years, I didn't. So today, the financial market is saying, we agree. We think there is either a recession or headed for a recession. We think inflation is going to subside. We think that we're going to be in a position where rates will come down and everybody's going to be refinancing. So let's make it either discouraging for a borrower to do it or expensive for the borrower to do it so that we get our yield back more quickly, or discourage them to do it altogether.
Yeah, and I think you just kind of answered my question. I want to clarify it though for our audience. And this is one of the things that we spoke about before. So one, are we in a recession? If not, are we going to go into a recession? And that's ultimately going to have a larger impact on rates. And when do you anticipate that happening?
I wouldn't be surprised if we're in a recession now. So accepted definition forever has been 2 consecutive quarters where GDP was negative. Well, we got that first and second quarter. Now, it's possible the second quarter could be revised, but it was down 0.9%. It'd be a hell of a revision to get that back positive. So that's always been an accepted definition, but of late, it's the National Bureau of Economic Research that actually says, you're in a recession, but they do it like 8 months to a year afterwards. So it doesn't do you too much good. And it seems like a lot of people, whether it's politically or whatever, I don't want to make this political, but there may be an inclination to want to change the goalposts to some degree. But listen, the argument against a recession is that the job market's so strong and unemployment's low. But when you look historically, that's exactly when you enter a recession. It's when unemployment is at its lowest and starts to turn higher. Now, we would have had the unemployment rate start to tick higher already, but do you know that we've got more people leaving the labor force? And when you when you make the labor force smaller, right, then the unemployed also account for that. Instead of counting them as unemployed, you're removing them from unemployed and removing them from you're not getting them out of the labor force if they're working. The ones you're eliminating, taking them out of the labor force, are the unemployed. So you're not counting those. And therefore the unemployment rate, at least optically, looks probably better than it is. However, there's a lot more people leaving the labor force. Of the most recent jobs report, 528,000 job creations. Oh my gosh, wow. 303,000 were part-timers.
Really?
Yeah, 303,000. And the way the surveys work is different. If you take the household survey, the 528,000 job creations, that takes one worker, and if he's working 2 jobs or 3 jobs, it counts 3 jobs.
Gotcha.
The household survey, which only showed 179,000 jobs created, that's actual phone calls to people. If you're working 1 or 2. Look, you got to be working 2 jobs for a reason, right? I mean, poor person's having a hard time making ends meet, right? So you've got to do it to survive, probably. So it's not like they're creating all these great jobs, and it's the poor person's working a part-time job just to try and make ends. They're working Uber or whatever to help their family out. It's not that this is such a robust economy. It's probably a sign that the economy is weaker than you might think.
Well, it's interesting what you're saying, because with higher inflation, it's going to fill a lot of those job openings. For the person who would have not had to work 2 or 3 jobs, they might have to do it right now because of inflationary numbers. Right. So Barry, rates in the 4s, when can we start to really expect to see rates go down?
I think we've already seen some of it.
Yep.
I think that there might be a short-term bumpy road if you don't see gasoline prices continue to decline and that benefit we've seen wears off, then the numbers for the next 2 months inflation reports may start to cause some heartburn for the mortgage bond market, because without the benefit of gasoline pulling inflation down, and inflation does what it's been doing and kind of being a little bit more elevated, when you compare them to the low readings that they will replace for August and September of 2021, you could see a little blip up in inflation and you could see a little blip up in mortgage rates because of it. But after that, fourth quarter this year, first quarter next year, I really think that rates should be under 5. And look, we might get there if we get really low inflation for whatever reason sooner. Okay, so I don't want to discount that altogether.
Right.
It's not a foregone conclusion, but look, nobody knows at 100%, right? We're giving our best guess on timing here. But I think for sure, fourth quarter, first quarter, you're going to be under 5. You're going to be in the mid 4s. You're going to be just fine. Half the existing mortgages are above 4%. More refi opportunities, as well as a lot easier time purchasing. And one other thing, just real quick before we close. Yep. Affordability is a big concern that people are bringing up right now. So first of all, look, we've talked about that. There's not going to be a housing bubble, but there's clearly a slowdown, clearly. But here's the thing, affordability, while it has become definitely more difficult, higher rates, but they are coming down, and also higher purchase prices are making affordability much tougher. So less buyers out there for now. But when rates come down, affordability gets easier. And the other thing is time will help, because people's incomes are rising. And no one looks at that, but that rise in income over this year, from last year to this year and this year to next year, will really alleviate a lot of that affordability problem. It truly will, and make it a lot more comfortable for people. So I do think that there'll be a good market. And somebody might say, okay, well, it's not keeping up on a percentage basis. It doesn't have to, because you don't use all of your income. And incomes are going up more than people think. If somebody looks at the number and says, oh, well, the median income's going up 6.7%. Yes, that's true. But that counts that terrific young person working at a fast food restaurant that's doing great. They're 16 years old. Bless their hearts. One day they'll be a home buyer, but it's not today.
Right.
So you should remove the bottom quadrant of income earners. You shouldn't take the aggregate number. When you do, year over year, incomes are going up at 9%, and that is really helping to bridge the gap.
Absolutely fantastic stuff once again. Hey, listen, Barry, if you haven't looked at MBS Highway, guys, check out MBS Highway. It's an unbelievable tool to utilize. It's going to help you with your business. You get Barry every day, and you're going to find out the direction the market is going. You'll be on top of this stuff with Barry Habib and MBS Highway. Always a great time to talk to you, Barry. Thank you so much for your time.
It's so good to talk with you too, always, my friend. You be well.
All right, thanks.